there. Well, let's say tech does win out, and all of our kids are stuck in headsets in school, or all this other stuff. The stories that we push forward now are going to be what they have reference of.
Yes.
All of these conversations and things that are on YouTube, which is it's their platform. That platform is the Disney movies of our kids' future. You know what I mean? Like the stuff we grew up on was spit out by corrupt, socialists, basically, kind of pushing an agenda, whether that's the fact that like our great grandparents were Cabbage Patch Kids, and so they are actually property of a corporation, and so on and so forth, which is kind of a little dark when you start thinking about that stuff. Like, wait a minute, what if our great grandparents really were property of these people, these Artemis cult, you know, um, masters of illusion, that rule the world. They're clearly masters of illusion, but there seems that there must be a point, behind all of it, not just, pure evil bathing in baby's blood kind of darkness, but like really, what if there's a system in play and they call it the Noah's Ark,
Mm.
right? That they frame this story, Noah's Ark, two by two, pairs of each. And, so they have some form of a system from an older version, maybe a Greco-Roman version of time long ago before the last, cataclysm. And so they have this mechanism in place, call it Mount Shasta or wherever they kind of convince us to not go to, the North Pole, right? The South Pole, whichever way you look at it. What if there's an operation going there and these people in charge indeed are the Hyperboreans, and they're just their idea of leading us is just reinstituting things so that we can run amok and all have these crazy experiences. And then they just something, whether it's the Phoenix phenomenon, like Jason Bashir likes to call it. So whether it's part of a simulation or if it's just a natural event, within the thing, there has to be a mechanism to start over, to repopulate, and that's like the archetype of Noah, or uh, what is it, of Noah or of Janus. You have Janus, or like the Allfather, or the Ant People, or you have like all these different paradigms that are kind of inferring the same thing, the cult of Artemis, a regeneration of mankind over and over and over again. And like each version's a little different, and we're always a little bit stuck on our own past, whatever our version was previous. Personally, I think there's a whole era missing, that we're not told about, and we're just kind of spun a song and dance when you get past a couple hundred years ago.
Hmm. Hmm.
Oh, I
Well,
can't hear you, Matt.
you
Sorry,
know,
I was on mute. What time frame are you thinking that
Oh,
couple hundred years is around?
you know what? It's so hard to say. I definitely know that this version of the narrative, at a minimum, just the narrative. We're not talking civilization as a whole, but the narrative that we're a part of right now, um, robber barons, Habsburg dynasty. There's very little evidence to me anyway, as far as like outside of academia, references to like the Habsburgs between 1000 AD and 1500. It's pretty sparse. So it's kind of weird. I don't know if this is just like set into play because we need to have the information available to satisfy us, if that makes sense. When we reach into Wikipedia and these different portals, to grab our information up, it would make sense that there would be a need for them to establish information for us to be able to grab
Yeah, and it's
readily.
interesting you say that because Emmanuel Kingman, when he talks about his millennial reign theory, he's saying that Satan, took over around the 1600s, and that would
Mhm.
kind of explain that gray area, right?
Right.
Because what he talks
Yeah,
about is a
and the
transition period.
inversion and the inversion of what was like, I've been looking a lot into the previous form of civilization. So what it looks like, it was like non-contractual. I don't have the exact name of it. Maybe I do here. Maybe I thought to keep that up. No, it doesn't look like it. but basically, it was just, you know, your word is your bond was the previous version of agreement amongst men.
Natural.
You know, right, natural law. And so yes, somewhere that shifted, and it seems to have been the reason for this great rebellion, also known as this worldwide civil war that happened, you know, between, if I had to nail it down, I'd say it's between like the year 1200, when we're told these crusades happened, right? Like, I think we're being told a very biased scenario on the crusades
hey,
of what they were.
Along that line, Randy, that video that I just sent you guys, and anyone
Yeah,
that's
I was
listening,
I was in on it. It was amazing.
anyone that's listening to this is the Jason Bashir's video on YouTube, where it's from Sunday today, and he's talking about it has Tartaria in the title, but he's talking about the Crusades and what really happened
right,
during the Crusades.
And he gives a lot of insight from the non-Jewish perspective, so kind of an unbiased point of view. And I really
well,
dig
and
what
did he say, Randy? In the end, it boiled down to a transfer of wealth. They sent these people on these crusades to quote unquote reclaim Jerusalem, but knowing that it was a half-assed army, you know, these guys were going with
and not just that, it
pitchforks.
was all informational propaganda. They're sending them to their deaths. They're sending
Exactly.
them into a trap because they control the other side. They control the armies on the other side. They're funding them. They're funding both sides of this thing, egging people on, just like today, just exactly like what we have going on over here, you know, in Ukraine and everything. It's the same thing. We have two sides that are really on the same side, working for, you know, each other in itself, and they are playing war games back and forth. And there's a certain percentage of the humanity that buys into these war games and buys into these scenarios and follows suit and goes and votes and goes and does their quote civic duty and all of this stuff. And that's really what the power structure is. You know, that's really what Rome is. It's embedded within the people. Rome is the mob, right? Like, if you ever seen Gladiator, you know, that's what Rome is. And that's why it's able to exist, is because it has a certain percentage of people mentally invested in what's going on, whether it be the Crusades, like back then, had all these people mentally and emotionally and spiritually invested in these directed wars, right? These things that are set up behind the scenes, probably far in advance. And, you know, they're just what I see these as, all of these wars, all of these rebellions, these are all mechanisms for change. And it's, sometimes it goes north, sometimes south, you know, sometimes it'll go for the betterment of good, and sometimes back towards natural law. I think we're actually going to be seeing, and are seeing, a shift back towards natural law in the face of all of this technology. And you know, I think that's what we're seeing now with the push of more sides of the story than just A or B. A lot of people are stepping outside of their comfort box and saying, what haven't I been handed? Because that's where the key is. You know, what information am I missing here? Because we have information overload, like absolute crazy. It's so hard to wade through this stuff. I mean, I've been spending a couple of years just to get a basic understanding of what Roman control structure is, the reason for the propaganda, including, you know, film, music, etc., or even underlying themes like the Tartaria movement, or, you know, the focus on ancient underground infrastructure. Why are we not focusing on who these people were that destroyed everything?
Well,
all
they
of the evidence.
Binary construct, and they don't care which side we pick as long as we're fighting one another. One of the things that really struck me when I was doing research for my last podcast with Matt was the realization that in Europe during World War II, like Germany and England, and, you know, these, you know, great powers were just going tit for tat, blowing up each other's heritage centers, targeting old world cities and religious sacred temples and so forth. And it was, you know, almost
right. It's literally a controlled demolition. You know, we have the term coming back around, you know, thanks to Charlie Robinson, the controlled demolition of American, you know, society, right? But this controlled demolition has been taking place in the background all along. It's never stopped. It'll hit a city, it'll hit a region, it'll move on. This thing is alive. This happening, that is in play, that we were all a part of, right? It's a living thing. And if you were to speak with a Japanese individual, they would tell you inanimate or conceptual objects are living things just as much as you and I are.
Well, it's an egregore. It's the idea of the egregore. It's the consciousness fed thought entity that takes
Right.
on a force of its own.
Absolutely. And after sitting back looking at all this stuff, man, that's the truest concept that I have come across. When you get people emotionally invested in something, it develops its own life, it develops its own driving force. And that's what we see with everything.
I.e. 9/11.
Rationalization.
9/11, 2020, same
Yep.
thing. And it's now we've got the driving force of the other side of the story happening, where people, there are being repercussions for the way people followed suit and went along with that. Now we're starting to see the other side of it play out, and it's the opposite emotional pull for the same subject that has to play out, and that's what we see happening right now. And of course, it's going to be brushed under the rug a lot more because of who controls media, but that's always been the case. Just like back in these crusade times, right? Who was pushing the agenda? It would have been the church, the scribes. These were the people that controlled, most likely, not just the printed word on paper itself, but the supplies to paper, because the churches were run by probably the oligarchs, the kings, etc. They all had a vested interest in each other, and this is why it worked. This is why they were able to spread so efficiently, acquire other people's wealth via contract so efficiently in the name of God. I mean, what are you going to do? Ignore that when someone comes knocking to your door and your kids are there and your kids are believers, and this guy says, if you do this deed or go on this crusade, then God will smile and favor your family, right? After you've spent an entire lifetime invested into faith that establishes just that, you're going to go with it. And that's what all of these people did, for better, for worse, whatever the case is. And that's exactly what we're seeing happen now, is people being led by their faith and their emotions. And that once upon a time, I kind of thought it was like a sad and upsetting thing, but I think it turns out that this is just an epic play that has to play out. And whether it's good or evil, I think a lot of evil in the world is overstressed and overpushed for shock value, but that's just my personal opinion. I think a lot of stories are spun up. That's what the whole fear porn, murder porn situation on TV and everything else is to get people emotionally invested in these subjects. Therefore, the subject themselves becomes an egregore.
Did you see the newest Will Smith movie, Emancipation? I mean, I wouldn't be able to watch it, but I watched the trailer, and it's just like a horror fest of, slavery.
Oh, they've got to drill that into your head, because they need you to see the idea
over and over again, re-traumatizing, just poking at the same wounds over and over again.
Yeah.
So a new group of, the younger generation is going to go see it and just become traumatized all over again. They won't let off.
That's the point. And that really makes me believe that the whole slavery idea, as it's been spun or been allowed to be played out in Hollywood, is a complete farce. I think slavery was a much different thing than we are being told. And that's the reason for this worldwide rebellion of like 100 years, if not more. Maybe this was a rebellion actually happening all the way back into the crusade times, and we're just not hearing that side of the story. We're not hearing the actual freed folk side of the story.
This Cabbage Patch phenomena, that Matt has been putting out.
Oh, yeah. That one.
The orphan trains, the insane asylums. And it's like, when we look at the images that are associated with it, it's usually white children, white babies. So, go back a few generations and, just to say, like, our folks were being put through hell.
Right,
so
right. But like, where did they originate is the question. Like, what if these films weren't put out, these Cabbage Patch Babies weren't put out as a kind of a sick twist? What if these were just the only thing they could do because of the fact that they had all of these children with daddy and mommy issues and issues with their own childhood? They needed dolls for all these kids. They needed an outlet for propaganda for all of these newly created people. So they invent the film industry and they invent the toy industry, and they'd push all these things out and establish all these things and start advertising them at the World's Fairs. You know, it seems to me that at some point there's a population that, of course, was wiped out or just, you know, maybe died off due to something like what we've been told the Black Plague is, or maybe they just, you know, naturally went through their life cycle. They were no longer fit for this world, much as we're all starting to die and get sick younger because this world is toxic to us now because we've made it that way. So what if that had happened in the past? And you know, the rebellion essentially was the remnants of these free people from before. Some people want to call them Tartarian, or you know, the tribes of Israel. I mean, there's all these different names for this previous civilization of knowledge bearers that we seem to have wiped out, you know, at least as far as what our side of the narrative is telling us right now. When I say we, I mean the we that are part of the umbrella of the narrative of Rockefellerian schooling. So that narrative, you know, the we that all take part in that thing that's been cast on us. It started somewhere. It seems to have started in Austria, kind of via the Hapsburgs, and in that entire area, it seems to have spread through religion to everywhere in the world, through the not just the Catholic faith and the Jesuits, but also financially through the Templars, right, which were, you know, the wealth, the treasurers of the church essentially for a lot of years. And this is all just based on common information that we're allowed to have. So it's really hard to see what was going on behind the scenes or why, or if even many of these wars did take place, because if they needed to repopulate these places, all of these places all around the world, what happened to deem that necessary? It would either have to be an entirely more drug out and ferocious war than we're allowed to understand, or some sort of a massive, vast, you know, die off, or there was nobody there to begin with, and we are way after the fact, like way Mad Max after the fact. You know, 1,000, 2,000 years, just coming out of somewhere, the Cabbage Patch, maybe, you know, and being kind of brought into this world and just kind of shown the bare minimum, but only propaganda, much like you would if you were in a fallout shelter and came back out after some massive cataclysm. It appears there was something that happened, you know, to this world, the desertification over the last supposed 400 years of the Sahara, etc. So it looks like there's something crazy that happened. Whether these narrators were part of this group that was underground, and whether the, say, Native Americans and or like Tartarians were some of the ones that had stayed above and weathered the storm, or were just in different locales, you know, we don't know, and we're just not going to find out. But there's definitely something to this idea of growing children, or if not growing directly, at least raising and indoctrinating the children. You know, when you look at the Cabbage Patch in that kind of a sense, of a metaphor, and we are also heavily indoctrinated, we're all Cabbage Patch kids, guys. We've all grown up in the Cabbage Patch where we were intended to grow up, apparently. You know what that means, man, is anybody's guess at this point.
Well, what percentage of people can't like name a relative or think of a relation beyond 3 or 4 generations? Most of us.
Everybody I've met, and I've met some old timers when I was younger, some old Croatians and Slavs, and they always referred to the old world as though it was something else. Maybe because they were children when they were there, or because of the stories of their grandparents, you know, which were even then few and far between. But they all went back to 2 generations back, somebody showing up on a boat, some of which feeling very forcefully pushed into the situation, you know, traumatized for having to leave their home, which was somewhere in Europe, Ireland, etc., and you know, being forced overseas. And so I don't think it was just black people that were forced on boats and told to go places for reasons. I think that this was a big thing, you know, and it blanketed all races. And many of our, like personally, I have a family from what was California, right? And they were established there and have since been called rebels, had, you know, been decapitated by the state, etc. So I mean, this is just in in my recent family over the last 200 years has that in it. So I'd imagine it's like that for a lot of people. And a lot of people don't get to see that side because they're stuck on a boat or ship somewhere or driven across the country on a train, you know, just detached from wherever they were holding their rebellion during this great rebellion that was happening. And also, if you had a rebellion happening and you were like, well, we can't kill everybody because then who's going to populate our cities and pay us taxes, right? So this would be the idea amongst, you know, the big people in charge that are currently, you know, previously currently, like in the 1700s running things, captains of industry and such, they're going to want their subservience. They need those people.
Well, and that's something that's greatly underplayed in American history is the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871, where essentially the United States split and there was the United States Corporation that was created, and then there were the 50 states. And when that happened, now what happens? Now you're part of a corporation. So now they need to feed that beast, right?
Yep.
And so what do they have to do? Then
they have to contract us and
fast
our
forward
relatives
50
out.
years later, and they
The
create the
Social
Social Security
Act.
system,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Spot
So
on, dude.
there's their feeder system for now. They needed something initially to kick that off, and that's where a lot of the gray area is.
Absolutely.
Right? Like we don't know what kicked that off. Why was it so low then? Was it because the deaths in the civil wars that we're led to believe that happened were much greater? Or were there that fewer people at the time? And, you know, it just, there's so many questions and so many variables in it that it's tough to nail it down.
It is. It's really tough. There's some really great things I've been mulling over as far as the theories to what could have happened. And, you know, first of all, is an epic, call it like all out galactic, you know, civilization wide war, right? Just, you know, devastation everywhere.
Like an H.G. Wells type thing.
That's exactly right. Spot on. And I've read this man's work like through and through, at least 3 or 4 of his books, all the way cover to cover. And I've come to realize this guy is telling people stories, whether he's pulling it from the ether, right? Whether he's reaching into the Akashic record to come up with these concepts, or whether he's been handed notes and stories from a previous generation is, you know, is up to whoever's
he's
out there
like
listening.
He's like Matt Groening of The Simpsons, right? I mean,
right. That's exactly
either
right.
He knows something we don't, or somebody's handed
exactly
him a script to say, okay, here's what's going to happen. You have to find a creative way to work it into your art, and we'll play it off as fiction.
Exactly. And you know, that could be the same thing with the Cabbage Patch thing right now is, you know, we have a lot of thespians running things. We have a lot of very frou-frou artistic, you know, thespians that have weird senses of humor running the propaganda machine of our world. It's just, it's weird out there, right? But it's, you know, never ceases to amaze, first of all. Second of all, it's always something new and mildly unexpected, right? With a big heavy helping of to be expected. So there's an art to this whole thing. And yeah, I think he was like the Matt Groening of his time. Between him and let's see, who are the others? I mean, there are quite a few, but definitely H.G. Wells. I mean, the man wrote the history of the world, right? You know, right alongside all of these other books. And then who do we have writing 1894? Or 1984? We have George Orwell also. We can't forget him. He was like the very next step in that. He's spinning all the dystopian stuff that we all come to be, you know, collectively indoctrinated to believe is going to happen in our lifetime. All that dystopian Demolition Man, Taco Bell's the only thing left kind of stuff, you know.
I'm curious to hear what both of you have to say about the simulation theory idea. Now, you mentioned Jason Bashir, and I struggle with that idea. Because I kind of feel like it's disempowering, like that you know, that I can't lean into my own free will. And
no, I think I feel where you're coming from. When I first heard it, you know, coming from the mindset of seeing the Matrix, right? It was very disempowering. But then when you start to look at just what reality is with vibratory physics and, you know, quantum realms and reality, all of these aspects that just, to me, they scream a type of simulation. Simulation's a bad word because we think within our computer a simulation. We don't think within all of time and space. The same type of idea, I guess you could say, as a simulation that we think of is in play all around us. What it is we're creating the next fractal inward. We are creating a 2D simulation in our computers, and so this is what most people think of when they think simulation. But I just ascribe simulation to, if we were to take one step back outside of this scale in time, and this is kind of an out there subject that takes a lot of disassociation, I guess, to play out within your own head. But if you were to step back out of our scale, out of our octave, into the next dimension back, call it the fourth dimension, whatever you'd like, or the fifth or whatever, and you were able to do that, and you were an entity in that scale, in that dimension, could you have created the reality that we exist in now? So that would be the same as, creationism, I guess you could call it. So it's not exactly a simulation, as it is just applying kind of a terminology that's commonplace to the way I understand it. Holographic is kind of an interesting term to use also.
I like the holographic concept because that fits in with what we're looking at in terms of ether physics and my experiences working with like entheogens and so forth.
Right, but I mean, it would still have to be programmed, though, in a certain sense. Even if it was like holographic, there would still be a programmer, or there would still be a program, or call it gematria, or call it sacred geometry. These are the programming languages of our world, right? Of our realm, or our as Jason Brashears called it, simulacrum, or simulation, or we call it reality, which I think is interesting that we call it reality, considering the Latin term real means road, right? So we're all just on this journey, this road, and we call it reality, when really it's it's wild, dude. And I think all of these terms can be easily justified, but also easily shot down. Like anybody can come along and be like, well, it's not a simulation because we can't prove that we're electrons inside of a giant computer motherboard, or any of that. But like when you look at it on in my opinion, when you look at it on like a musical scale, like an octave scale, we're only able to understand and see and interact with things that are on our harmonic. So that's a very narrow, I guess you could call it, bandwidth that we're able to interact with, and an even narrower bandwidth that we're even able to mentally invest ourselves into, or spiritually, or what have you. So it's pretty narrow. So to me, it seems that if we're able to see this bandwidth of light, and other creatures are like dogs are able to see different bandwidths of light, or honeybees are able to see ultraviolet, and the universe is a life machine. It's it populates, it peoples, it creatures. We could see that all around us. So just based on things that we see, there would have to be something bigger than us, essentially, an octave outside of us.
Yeah, I have no problem with any of that. And again, like I embrace this idea of a holographic universe, a holographic reality, which has been hacked and is being programmed from entities that don't have our best interests in mind, that are sucking our life force, in fact. But when the idea of this simulation, to me, it kind of it takes the agency. It feels to me like it removes my free will, like that I don't have agency within this, because I'm interested in self-exploration, knowing thyself, healing myself.
Right. And no, I get what you're saying. I just try to not let the terminology as it's been spun to us like resonate with me that same way. When I think simulation, I used to automatically think the Matrix, trapped, imprisonment, so on. But as I've come along and started to realize in some deeper level, and this is going to sound off, to people who aren't invested in looking within, but at some level, I am the catalyst that started all of this, if that makes sense. And it's weird. Or I'm, a volunteer in this thing. Right. Well, I'm here on a journey, and the more I seem to learn about myself, the more I realize I really am trying to do something here, and I'm learning how to do it. I've been indoctrinated my entire life to look at this control structure like it's a negative thing, or to look at, like, for example, look at Freemasonry and say, oh, these people are dark and evil and twisted, when I don't know that. That's just a belief system put out there, and I used to resonate with it, and now I'm just like, well, these people build buildings, dude.
Yeah.
Like, this is what they do. They build buildings and they have powwows in their basement, and talk each other up and go over the details of different forms of magic. Magic being the control of your own mind and your own destiny. And yes, that stuff is covered up and deeply secretive because you have to find it yourself. You have to find magic or ritual or self-empowerment or self-betterment on your own. You're not supposed to be able to, in their opinion, just reach out into the cloud and grab the information.
And that's why, Randy, when I think about it when I hear simulation, Mathew, and how I don't want to matrix it up, right? I don't want to simplify it down to a point where we're insignificant, right?
Or,
so
or
when
someone else is in control and we're not.
Yeah.
Like,
So when I think about it that way, what I think about it as is like a computer program, like ones and zeros, right? So it's a choose your own adventure. You have limited but unlimited options at the same time. But what convinces me, or not convinces, but leads me to show me that ones and zeros really matter is when we start looking at things like sacred geometry. We start looking at fractals. We start looking at repeating patterns in things over and over in our environment that make the creation, right? So all those ones and zeros add up, and there's no limit to it. Now, the simulation really narrows it down to a very, almost video game type feel to it, where I feel like it's the opposite. When we're in a simulation, the possibilities are endless because those ones and zeros can be programmed in any way you want. And that's where magic comes into play. That's where the power of faith and belief and things like that come in. And that elevates you in your game. And that I really feel like that gets you closer to your truer programs of ones and zeros. It gets you closer to that natural way of life, that sacred geometry based life, and it gets you out of the material matrix version of the ones and zeros, because you can go that route.
Yeah, that material simulation with it. Yeah, that simulation that media casts, that illusion that is cast by media, propaganda, etc., whatever you want to call it, that machine that is out to convince us that we are only, and the keyword is only, and that anything can come after that only. It can be that we're only consumers, or only this, or only, listen, we're not only anything. We're we're just about everything. We've just been convinced that we're not. We've been convinced that, and that's what this whole Cabbage Patch thing is about too. The reason it's getting pushed out there is this element wants to create an illusion and convince people that they're meaningless once again. And flat Earth, kind of alerted a lot of people that, wait a minute, maybe some things have meaning, and the new exuberance of spiritual teaching in the world is kind of creating a situation where there's a power grab to get some of that attention back. And so you have this Cabbage Patch, more fear porn. So what if just, let's say, what if 3 generations ago half of our ancestors were created by this corporation? What does that change about us today? What does that change about our spiritual journey today, or our investigations into ourself, or what have you? All that it tells me, and this is kind of the perspective that's not getting a lot of traction, because everyone wants to go straight into the, well, that's scary and that's dark. But I mean, if this is a self-sustaining machine that we're a part of life, that is created for us to have these experiences, wouldn't it make sense that they would keep it running? And would that make it such a dark thing that what if our great grandparents came out of a test tube or something? I think that's pretty awesome and special, and I think that should be the story. Like,
Randy, I think of it on the other side also, though, that it could just be a predictive programming again. It could be that thing where they're putting it out there because they are planning, or they know an
what's
impending
going to happen, and
impending
because we
reset.
sterilized half of our people,
Yeah, an
over the last
impending
couple of
reset
years.
is going to happen. So they're going to have to repopulate. And guess what? Our technology is such now that we can grow babies in a bag, but what are they going to do? They're going to sell kids' toys, babies in a bag first. And they'll they'll cartoonize it. They'll put it in film movies and put it on Disney, and then they'll slowly roll it out, and then that'll become the norm. And that's the next upgrade of us, right? That's the ones with the chips, and those of us that don't want to take the chips, well, you're gonna have to.
Yeah, we will just be the Native Americans of the future. We
we're
will
gonna
just
be
be wiped out. Our stuff will be taken. Exactly.
We're gypsies. We're gonna have to live off the land. We're gonna have to move around.
and
then
we'll go to the way of the Tartars.
Sedentary.
Yeah.
So
we'll be like the random
aspect of it gets our acquiescence. It gets us to buy into it subconsciously
because we didn't object. Yeah, because we don't thoroughly object to it, right? That's your consent in this game, and
but the problem is, and I like the way that Jason Brashears brings this up, when you're investing into the collective egregore, right? And you set out to stop this next impending reset from happening. God, I got to do something. You get out there and you're protesting, or you're engaging with this machine that is actively indoctrinating everybody and yourself and everything else. And you're engaging with it. You're fighting it. You're just as invested in that machine as the people that are going along with it. And all of our real magic, this is the stuff that's kept secret within these societies. Right. Within these societies, magic is kept secret, and magic is the control and understanding of yourself, your world, and how you interact with it to create said response.
And Randy, I felt that in 2020.
Yeah.
In March, April, May, of June, even of 2020, I got wrapped up in fighting COVID. Right. I was not going to let it get in my house. I wasn't going to let it, affect my child, even though they started shutting down schools and,
right.
all this stuff. And
I
wasn't going to let him wear a mask, all this stuff. But in doing that, I lost myself. I got wrapped up in the machine, and the machine just chewed me up and spit me out. And what happened? I came out of it. I was divorced. I was alone. I was in a different state, in a different place. And that was like a wake-up call, like, holy shit. Like, you cannot fight the machine. The machine's going to win.
Matt, when you said you were fighting COVID, you mean you were fighting the narrative?
Fighting the bullshit, the propaganda behind it, all this is going to be the next, bubonic plague, and that, we can't go within 6 feet of another person.
It was hard not to. It was hard not to when society as a whole is buying in, and that's where the life of that thought concept comes into play. Like, I guarantee you, if you tried to whittle it down to any one person that is solely responsible for any of that stuff getting pushed, you would never find the one person. You would always find a massive group of people who had zero interaction with each other, because this thought form thing, it starts within many, and as soon as it hits like that 100th monkey effect or something, it cascades. It becomes the hive mind. Yeah, and that's what we see. That's what popular culture is. It is the hive mind, and some people call it AI.
Mind, it's actually a greater mind that the hive
infests itself into.
Yes,
and it starts to take over units within the giant hive. Right. Like, it's crazy how that all works. And see, that's all fractal mathematics also. And then that all kind of ties in with sympathetic vibratory physics, right? And so you guys were showing last time, when you did the like electric the cathedrals, cathedrals with the chakra points, right? So let's say how we have television now, we have cell phones. I mean, you could turn on your TV and watch a commercial and have that jingle in your head for a year and a half, or you can listen to a song and have it resonate in your skull for days and days, or forever, your entire life. You're forever changed by that music, right? Or by that thing. Now, in the past, in these cathedral times, in these epic temple times, which wasn't that long ago, it seems. Correct. There we go. So in your cathedral, right? Who do you have that's operating this cathedral? You have the scribes, right, of the church. You have whatever the religious or spiritual power structure is in this area at the time. Now, keep in mind, in these times, people don't have access to radios, they don't have access to televisions, they only have printed propaganda in the form of novels, books, scrolls, things like this during these temple times, right? Today they've put the temple in your living room. All right, this is essentially the same unit that they're using to indoctrinate and sway the minds of millions and sway the hearts. More essentially, swaying the hearts of all these people is the important part. Today, they're doing that through the sound waves they're putting out in commercials. Sometimes things you don't even hear. They're doing this through all of the cartoon jingles and different crap you hear on your radio. There's a reason it's tuned to 440, and that's not just to not cross-mogenate properly with you. It's because it's just close enough to 432, just close enough that it hits your heartstring, right? It hits your heartstring, and your subconscious wants to resonate with it, so it pays attention to it a little more. Is what happens. It's yes, and it's like it causes a feedback loop.
It's an agitation, right? Because
right, exactly.
it just gets you out of sync, just
enough to pay attention to it. Yeah,
Yep.
just enough to focus your thoughts and your will on that item, on that jingle, right? Like there's a reason we all buy Sara Lee when we go to the store if we decide to buy Sara Lee, and it's
Randy, there's I used to go to my grandparents' house once a year during the holidays, and it was always Thanksgiving. And to this day, I remember the damn jingle for their local, like Bradley's. It was this place called Hills, right?
Yeah.
And they had these little elves, and they go, according to legend, little folks know Hills is where the toys are. I remember that freaking jingle to this day.
yeah,
because they would just go over and over. And now think about other things that they've done that with, right? The Pledge of Allegiance, good things, but then they've also done it with some negative stuff.
Well, and think about the weekly ritual of going right, and that's all that this is. So when people want to lift up this Tartaria place and this movement based on these cathedrals, these are just programming centers, guys. Like you need to understand that these places were built with a purpose. There's a reason they invested the time, money, effort, science, if you want to call it science, but definitely technical know-how to integrate these organs into here, to tell the people where to sit right in the heart there.
Randy,
they are speaking to these people's hearts.
Do you think, because Mathew and I talked about this briefly in I can't remember which discussion, but we obviously know that this can be used for beneficial purposes. Do you think they also used it for negative purposes as well?
Here's the part that's gonna like probably not sit well with most people. I don't think this has ever been used for any kind of a beneficial purpose. I think that the people that are in charge of engineering, and maybe not the engineers themselves, but the people that are bankrolling this to put these buildings there, that are facilitating this stuff, the only intention they have is to continue the control structure and to create that infestational hive mind. Okay, that's the only purpose there are for these. Which is why they hung all the witches. Well, they
what's that, Mathew?
I'm just wondering, Randy, why you say that, and like were the people that burned the witches the same entities that actually built the cathedrals?
I think that they were the ones bankrolling this whole thing. They were behind the scenes. There's a certain allowance that takes place when it comes to maintaining some form of a balance in this world. It seems like, anyway, it never completely goes to shit. You notice that? Like it gets close. We like to believe it's gotten close. But then we see, and it all depends on your perspective, of course, but then we see like an emergence like today of a more awakened, spiritually adept folk coming to fruition. Now it seems to me that we have ebbs and flows in like the wave form of time, right, that we're riding in. So we have highs and lows, and we were in a pretty deep low, it seems, something between the year 1000 and the year 1800, right? It definitely seemed like that revolution, that industrial revolution, took on this life of its own, started controlling all these people, taking the power out of the individual and casting it into the collective. And that's what these facilities, these places, were for. Now that doesn't mean that you might not have had a kind-hearted priest in some of these, or some of the people operating the instruments, bells, and things like that may not have been of good heart and may not have done things to heal the people and to help the people, or the person that created the organ maybe generated and created this organ for a divine purpose at first, right? And once it was found out that you could speak to people's hearts through these, so there might have been a very small window of time, maybe 1,000 years, say, like we're taught to think of, the millennial reign, right? Maybe this 1,000 years was the only period in time that we're aware of anyway, where these facilities, these technologies, these sciences were being used for the betterment of the people, but definitely not since probably the year 1000 and the crusades and everything else, like at least not based on what I'm seeing. We do have the building of all these cathedrals in places like England. What else? And around the world, and it's always in a population center that has been created by these secret groups, or by these odd fellows, these Masons, these Hapsburgs, these
Do you
all of
think,
these
Randy,
different.
do you think there's any chance that these people were drawn to there? Because, one of the things I look at, like when I look at the world's fairs and specifically in America, because Europe's just a totally different animal. And I haven't, I'll be honest, I haven't dove deep enough to really break it down. Like I understand the brief history of the established America. And if you look at the world's fairs, you look at the cities, right? And some of them, you look at it and you're like, this is real weird. Like, why is Buffalo, New York so important? Why is Tennessee so important? Why is Omaha, Nebraska so important? And then you're like, oh, well, these were probably significant previously. There's something to this land that is energetically enhanced, ley lines, whatever it be, magnetism, whatever it may be.
Something in that coding, in that,
and it draws these people there, and then it goes out after that.
Or it could just be that, in a previous version. And this is why I kind of like the simulation terminology, because if you think about different ages or different epochs, the things that we look at as myth and legend today more than likely actually happened in a previous era or a previous epoch, or long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away, right? But like, so these things, these concepts, in my opinion,
Randy,
somehow.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I was just listening to the Strange Neighborhood podcast, and she had on Andy from Deep Share, and they were talking about just that, talking about the fact that, a lot of these constructs over time are changing rapidly right now. And we're starting to see it. We're starting to feel it collectively. And it's a really impressive. And anybody that hasn't listened to it, I recommend go listen to over there at Strange Neighborhood. Great interview, but conversation between the two of them. And they talked about all the, from creation, spirituality to simulation, all different stuff,
right?
So,
the paradigm shifts,
yes,
that are happening on an incredible, and this is why I'm super fortunate and blessed to have had personal experiences of the fractal nature, namely at first through psychedelics. So understanding that geometry, being able to interact with that geometry has helped when I start looking at the mathematics of what vortex mathematics is, what the capabilities of some of these ideas really are. Like, for example, if you spin water, or if you vibrate water a certain frequency and you have it inside of a quartz tube, at a certain point it will disappear. No, it will not turn to steam. It will disappear completely from the vial. So everything has this sympathetic resonance, and this could very well be what they're talking about in the biblical sense when they speak of a rapture, or like people disappearing, or nowadays they're talking about this 5D earth transition, right? Or in the past, and I think this is maybe going to be out there to some people, but in the past we had spontaneous human combustion. Nobody could explain it. These people just, for all intents and purposes, disappeared and turned to an ash that we can't even get out of our hottest furnaces, right? So there's a possibility that some of these things are overlapping and have to do with each other. and we're just like not putting the pieces together, or we weren't really allowed to put the pieces together when it came to this spontaneous human combustion thing, which was happening right around the same time as all these world fairs and all this
and what
stuff.
else happened? The Kentucky meat rain, right? You ever hear about that story in 1876, where this lady was outside and all of a sudden this like flesh-like material just fell out of the sky and covered her?
Well, it's wild, and man, and then with the petrification of whatever was here in the past, creating rocks that look like bacon or like sides of beef. I the the format is there for sure. The substance as we understand it is wrong, but the general layout of this meat rock, is
Well, it's
spot
macro
on.
micro, right?
It's
Randy,
crazy.
when you start looking at it, that's all it is. I mean, look at our internal organs, our internal system, and then look at nature. You can find everything that's in us that from a shape standpoint in nature. It's all part of the programming. I mean, we are part of this. We are connected to this.
And I think that's the part that we're being led away from with the way simulation has been thrust upon people and is supposedly being like kind of commandeered by Elon Musk and being run with in this propaganda format.
Right? They want to associate it with computers.
Right.
Instead
to
of
get people to dive into this thing that is coming. And I don't care what anybody says, this metaverse, whether it's in our lifetime or our children's, it's coming. This is why they're pushing so hard to get so many people to kind of disassociate from spirituality and the real world, if you want to call it that. I mean, who knows what's real and what's not anyway, right?
Seems like the metaverse is they're trying to trap us like one level deeper in the false.
Exactly.
reality.
Yeah. In the
you know what I tell people, if you want to know what their next step is, go watch Demolition Man, because that's before they can get us fully engaged into the metaverse.
Yeah, they have
right?
They have to create.
They have to
outward.
take that step to almost dehumanize you first, and by living in a security state, which is essentially what they do in Demolition Man, they start to dehumanize you, right? You get there's machines watching your every move, listening to your every word. You're being, social credit scored, all this stuff. So they're going to get you to that level. And then when you can't compete in that level, well, it's like your only option left now is the metaverse. So guess what, guys?
And they're going to hand that to you. They're going to hand it. They already are handing it to these people. $150 for one of these helmets.
Well, it's the way they set up the previous generation. The last 50 to 75 years, at least in America, was if you couldn't make it, well, guess what? Your next option, you can go fight for Uncle Sam, and you can be a sacrificial lamb for the cause. And if you make it out, okay, great. If not, well, you were a good cog for the machine. Thank you for your service.
Yeah. Or you can go and help somebody else realize their dream and work for them, which is slavery. So you're looking at slavery A, slavery B, or you can go and be a free person. But guess what? You're going to be homeless and you're going to live without everything ever. The government will give you the bare minimum because there happens to be a food bank that is run by a nonprofit or something. So you'll be able to eat. You'll maybe have a tent. You'll have some ground to lay on. And you know what? They're not going to sweat you if you're one of these homeless. They don't care about these homeless people, dude. Those homeless people feel like they've broken out of the system.
Here's my counter to that, Randy, is that, we go back to the old ways, the old, knowledge, so to speak. These people were in connection with nature. They lived by natural law. They lived by nature's law. And I think them forcing people to do that, you're going to see a lot of people thrive because it's in their instinct to be able to go into nature, to disconnect from this material world and go out in nature and thrive. And people are so scared of that. And I get it. It's a scary thought.
And we've been boogeymaned. We've been boogeymaned our entire lives.
To have to live off the land is like this, like there's
boogeymen out there.
God's not going to provide for you. There's plenty of people. Everything that we need is out there. It's just that the people in charge want you to believe in scarcity, and they want you to believe that there's limited resources and they control them. And the only way that you can get them is by playing their game. And that's the type of mental fuckery we've been under in this system. And people have to understand, listen, you can succeed outside of their system. You can grow your own food in your backyard. You don't have to sustain your whole family all year round, but start with a couple things,
or just start something for yourself.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Create a hobby,
the whole
work with
thing
your
is set up
hands.
to disempower.
And
The
that's
whole
where I
thing
was
is-
going with it, was that these buildings were possible in the old world because these people were connected with the natural skills, the natural, sacred geometry. They were masters of it. They were masters of math. They had skills. They were master, masons, carpenters.
Well, dude, look at some of the military instruments you had coming into play during the Civil War, during these wars in the 17 and 1800s. These things were masterpieces of engineering, just incredible machinery. I mean, some of and they're doing this stuff with these old natural laws in mind. Everything's built by hand, and what's not built by hand is built just in incredible quality. And I think that there were different families, perhaps like these Hapsburgs being one of them, that facilitated the growth of so many craftsmen and these different. In the past, they would have been looked at as like kingdoms, right? So you have these different kingdoms all around, and you have the people at the very top who are the ones that are willing to put other people's necks out for themselves and for their interests. Then you have other people that they are here just because they want to create. And so these people with what they consider currency or money or gold or whatever, who at some point, these people at the top, they were miners also, right? Like these are the families of mining tycoonists from, hundreds of years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago. So you had this like very different structure back then. As far as, the kingdom, who was serving, who was free, who wasn't. But I don't know that you ever go back to a time where you weren't putting in some kind of service to the city or the state if you were taking part in that paradigm. Like you could at one point, at least even in America, the Native Americans or the Tartars out on the plains that we're told about anyway, these people still had the luxury to choose whether they wanted to live the natural life up until a few hundred years ago. And then something came out, and there was this, in my opinion, it's technology is what happened. All of this high-tech stuff we see coming around in the Civil War, this was like the normal. Steampunk, I think, has been brushed under the rug. Airships, I mean, a whole degree or like plethora of freedoms, technologies, and possibility existed for an extended period of time that we're not told about. And it may have been, up until as recently as like the 1500s, when you had the influx of the church starting up. You also had these Habsburgs starting to take control of Europe. You had like a shifting happening in China, like a modernization. So this whole modernization thing, I don't know if it's like the catalyst to this dystopian like era and world we find ourselves in today. But it definitely seems that this technology has had an intelligence of its own from the very get-go, and is helping to facilitate its own creation and integration into what is becoming known as AI. And so this is why simulation doesn't quite fit, because it would take it's not as simple as a programmer and a simulation. We're all co-programming from within, and meanwhile our higher selves are helping to co-create this entire version of everything. So it's just incredible. But yeah, so Great Rebellion.
The way you describe simulation actually makes me think about it differently now. Now I'm seeing it as like the simulation is the artificial construct that's overlaying, the divine, right, call it the holographic, universe or what have you. But so that
it's an informational construct. It's just information.
And we get trapped into it. We get enticed into it. We get seduced into it over and over again, layer by layer by layer, and we're working our way out of that. I think that's what we're going through right now.
Right, but it's a current, and it pushes back. And that's what technology may very well be a part of, is this pushback. That's all right, giving us an opportunity to make a decision if we go further in, like the metaverse, or do we stand our own ground and start a new age and a new renaissance, basically, which I think that we are on the threshold of, when you start seeing some of the technologies, the way people are using them, aside from the system. Tesla technology, rotary, what do they call them? Turbines, right? Like this guy, I was listening to Higher Side Chats the other day. Just incredible stuff. Incredible stuff. I mean, all of the energy we could ever want is being rediscovered, and some would call it within the ether. Bricks for batteries is a great example. Now, if you had these solar panels, you would need something to charge, wouldn't you? So you would build your house out of bricks and charge your house. So, I mean, there's all these things that could be. These are possibilities for our future and for our children's future. But we're being kind of like subverted and redirected into investing all of our time. And I don't think this is true all across the board, but in a general populace sense, investing all our time going up in arms about, oh, what happened to Tartaria? And then, so all these people are creating this content to pull attention away from the things that are actually being uncovered, which is some of the technologies, some of the ways of life, the spirituality people are reestablishing that may have been wiped out, a few hundred years ago. Pretty systematically, it seems, spirituality as a natural product was wiped out and then was re-embedded into the mystery schools to be later discovered. So it's like this weird thing that seems to happen throughout time. They'll bury everything, literally and figuratively, right? We have the burial of, the land, and then we have the burial of the information. And then it's up to this next group of, Cabbage Patch Kids who are coming from nothing, basically, which I think maybe the euphemism or maybe the metaphor is, listen, everything's buried and these kids are coming from nothing. They have nothing. We've buried everything. They're starting over completely. So it's almost as if they're raising out of the earth like cabbages, right? So, I mean, that could be a metaphor for the Cabbage Patch Kid. It could just be, and then like with that, you have different eras, epochs, ages, and it does kind of make sense that they would want to cover up a technologically advanced, I don't know if I'd call it utopian. I think there was still a control system in place during this previous post-medieval era that we don't really have a lot of information on. We just have the information on the wars, some of the families that were the victors of these wars,
the generals in these wars,
the architects of all of these things. And the architect thing, when you have a head architect who's in charge of probably 50 or 100 different building companies, I guess it's possible, that's what they're doing, is they're putting this guy at the top who just spends his time, pushing the checks across the table.
Yeah, it'd be like crediting Bill Gates with all this different stuff just because
with
he
mRNA
owns all
technology. Yeah. Like, oh, that Bill Gates and his mRNA technology.
Because his foundation funded it. Yeah.
Right. And that's exactly, I mean, what would you do if you were a baller and you poured all of your life savings into something? You would want to be remembered as the man that brought that to humanity, right? So that's what they're doing, and they're continuing to do it. I mean, we have Elon Musk, who started out being the billionaire who created PayPal, and then you find out he didn't create PayPal; he stole it from this other dude. And then you find out, later on that the same thing happens when he gets involved with Tesla. He buys it out or subverts somebody, takes charge of it, and then goes, nope, I've always had it. It's always been mine and it'll never not be mine, So like, okay, if that's happening now, it definitely was happening in 17.
Well, and that's what the Rockefellers did in the 1850s and beyond, right? They started doing that. They did it with education. They did it with medicine. They did it with oil. They just get these things and then they run with it and it's theirs.
Well, and I think that these all came from this same, and I almost want to call it an entity because it tracks back in a really strange way. This two-headed eagle that if you look far enough into it, you find out that, that we have this long time battle between the eagle and the serpent. And at some point in the past, it was just the eagle and the serpent. And then, the serpent is quelled and the eagle decides to grow two heads. And so you have this weird kind of thing that happens, and it's like stamped onto history. And you can look through Wikipedia. It's just crazy. But this Hapsburg, group or family is just one of these players. This is just one of the players that they're willing to put out there, you know, that they're willing to put out and show, much like the Rockefellers or JP Morgan or any of these tycoons. This is what we're being offered. But I think that this is like an homage to a type of people or a specific grouping of maybe many people. So
So Randy, what's the two-headed eagle? Is that like the split in consciousness? Does it represent like the binary construct that
I think so. Yeah, I think that we went from a unity based consciousness, I guess, you know, which would have been this golden age, or would have been this 1,000-year reign, right? Or this same idea. So like we're just working with a loose concept here. We had this or this golden age or this renaissance, right? It could be a term used for that. Golden age, 1,000-year millennial reign, let's say kingdom of heaven, right? Or like kingdom, God's kingdom on earth. Any of these things can be symbolically like tied to unity consciousness. You know, Michelle Gibson puts it that way. She refers to the most recent previous one as being a Moorish unity consciousness. So I don't know why you would need a race or a type of people if it was a true unity consciousness, but that's just me. But you know, so you have unity.
Logos points to that as well.
Well, and then you had within that unity consciousness structure, you had the eagle and the serpent, or previous to that, you had the eagle and the serpent. And then if you look into like Quetzalcoatl is a feathered serpent, right? So that's symbolically showing you that that's unity consciousness, civilization. Okay, so like these ones that have these certain icons for their god or their you know, end all be all, alpha omega, right? And then you have this division which happens, alpha and omega, right? It's no longer the one. You notice that suddenly God is no longer the one. He splits back up again, becomes the alpha and the omega. Then he splits further. He gets a little bit more, you know, schizophrenic here a few hundred years back with the inception of the Jesuit order, the Catholic order, and so on, and then suddenly becomes threefold. So that threefold, you know, it's anyone's guess. I think that what that was just the next level of separation, and so they rolled it out as, instead of being that just the alpha and the omega, they more or less kind of wrapped it all into one, split it up into three, and gave people an opportunity to not be unified anymore. So you had the duality of male and female, but now you also have an option to be neither. So you have this weird fragmentation that's happening symbolically along the ages. And you know, there's a weird push to recreate the unity consciousness through technology, which is basically the whole thing splitting in half again. So it's this weird, very fractal kind of essence, a splitting apart and a regrowing within each center of all of these concepts that's happening. And it makes me wonder about the whole thing when we're being told that there's this other planet that we might populate sometime. It's being called Mars. It really makes me wonder, guys, if this country that we're on, or this world that we're on, was the previous version, you know, of a desert planet after something had happened, to that unity consciousness. You know, were they removed? Did they leave? Something changed drastically, and that's like the biggest struggle I'm having, is trying to find like a definitive source on what that thing happened that caused this great rebellion, that allowed the influx of these monarchies to become the corporations they were, and move unchecked into the world like we see today, and allow, you know, essentially kind of a dark egregore to dominate most things. I wonder what happened to lead to the downfall of that. And, you know, symbolically in religion, we have the crucifixion of Christ, right? So we have some idea of the concept that something happened, but we're just not allowed to understand what. And man, I'm looking forward to that information coming out at some point.
Wasn't it interesting you talk about the schizophrenic nature of this construct of the simulation? And isn't like science, modern scientism, really premised on the idea of splitting everything down into separate parts, right?
It needs two poles, right? For the battery. Everything has to be bipolar.
Well,
Well, but
I
then
mean, in the
within
sense
that
that you're
battery,
breaking things down to
you have,
understand them.
yeah, you break the battery, or you get into the the structure of the atom, and then so you have many different parts, and they're always going up to CERN, right? And they're breaking even more particles and finding out what's even further to be broken apart inward, right? And then from the mind point of view, we have this metaverse thing that they're looking
Right.
to have a certain degree of consciousness embedded within
Or
voluntarily.
Elon's brain chip, right, Randy?
Right. And so it's this weird schizophrenic nature of what's going on in this place, and it's very fractal. That's the thing that's interesting to see happen. Is it's it's easy to look at it and go, wow, this is like dark and twisted and evil, but I think it's just the universe created. And it's really weird when you're in it. Like when you're in it, you're like, wow, this is dark and evil and light and everything. But it kind of comes back to vibratory harmonic, sympathetic vibratory physics. And this is why the souls that are vibrating with the higher self, I guess you call it, or the spiritual, will begin to embed themselves further in the spirituality. Those that are involved in the materialistic
Randy
side.
start to gather together. That's the thing I've noticed, because even just starting the podcast, I mean, we were talking about it on our patron call on Friday night, that I started this show and I've started like attracting like-minded people, and you start to gather in these groups and start to have these discussions.
in the midst of the separation.
Yes.
So it's super interesting. And if it's like, if you're asleep, you won't catch it. If you're asleep, you won't see it. You won't notice the beauty that's happening, even through like all this madness. Yes, it's absolute madness, but you have an option to invest yourself in it. And if you don't, if you invest yourself in the reunification of consciousness, like we are kind of here, putting these ideas across to people is profound. I never could have imagined, not only hearing some of these concepts, but understanding them and being able to extend them to others in a practical sense that's using history that we've been handed and adapting it to help others more clearly see their journey in themselves. Like it's mind blowing. And yes, more and more of us are getting together and finding the right people. It definitely took a pushing away of certain energies and certain attachments and things, for sure, to roll out the investigation into this side of life. It doesn't come easily, and I hope people don't misunderstand that all this woo woo talk is coming directly in my part from experience, from personal experiences that I've had that have changed my life. And some of them fall in the category of indoctrinated possibilities, like UFO encounters, for example. I've had those, and it was so profound, it altered my entire trajectory. Later that week, I was speaking with Mark on My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. Now I'm talking to all sorts of different people that are sharing a similar but very different perspective in a very unique journey. I've since come to appreciate a lot more of what's going on and wonder bigger questions, like, for example, with chemtrails. I see them spraying X's into the sky. And I've been looking a lot into ritual magic and stuff lately. I'm curious as to what these logos in our world are, what they're doing to us, what is being pushed on people, because I see the control it has. I see it. I see the control that some of these games have on my kid, that games didn't have that big of a grip on me when I was younger. But then I also see the logos embedded in them. I see the sounds. I hear the harmonic of certain, frequencies coming out of these games, just like I'm starting to see in certain people's YouTube videos and things. And these frequencies are keyed in to get you to deeply focus in whatever you're looking at.
The combination of frequencies and colors, Randy, it's such a powerful thing.
It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And but with that, the understanding that it can be used to do harm, I'm starting to learn that it can also be used to better myself and to do good with and for others. and you know, so my life has changed. I went from being completely almost like black pilled, you know, after seeing the Matrix growing up, and then you know, aliens, underground bases. I mean, all the dark stuff, fluoride. I mean, they're poisoning us. Oh my god, you know. So like all of these things just leads you to a pretty dark place, and you want to run away. Maybe not. Maybe it's not those specific things. Things just happen in life, lead us away. But I think that we're only led away so that we can be led back in. Because it's definitely come around for me. So, you know, I just hope the best for all the others out there that are struggling. And you know, I think that odds are Matt and Mathew, if folks are tuning in and being receptive to this information, whether it's on the alchemy of the soul or the old world, or you know, because with the old world comes cymatics and comes alchemy, comes you know, the mysteries of the cathedrals, right? And all of these beautiful things come from, oh shit, what you mean an entire civilization was wiped off the face of the planet a few hundred years ago? How does that work? You know, that's pretty scary. That's pretty dark. You know, and they've been telling us the earth is round and it's flat. Wait a minute, what? You know, so like that could take you and put you in a really dark place. And I think that it's designed to do that in a weird kind of way, much like everything we're being
But
spawned.
on the opposite end, once you break through that coding, and you're able to open up your mind to the possibilities that, hey, listen, there were likely giants here, there were likely fairies here, there were likely dragons
Dude,
here,
yes.
there were likely all of these magical things. And then just go out around you, look at what this land, without anyone touching it, provides you. It provides you everything
this
you need.
version, if you want to call it that, of everything. It's incredible. You know, started looking at just a hillside differently, knowing that there's an entire embedded history
Layers.
in just that. And I mean, like, we're not even layers, like epochs, ages, just untold amounts of time. Because you know, if as a vast majority of what we are sold and told growing up is a lie, then guess what? So is the linear, you know, the linear defeating nature of time that we were spun to understand as there was a beginning and an end. You know, I think that that's completely wrong. I think it's ultimately almost infinite. Whether this same piece of dirt I'm standing on has been physically underneath my foot, you know, for the last million years, or whether it's been moved around by X amount of forces, you know, who knows, right? But it's definitely existed. And even if it didn't exist, it was still a construct before it existed, a thought construct, because that has to be a thing. Because guess what? I can imagine something and then set out and create it. And if I can do that, then holy cow, there's got to be a bigger dimension or thing out there that is also able to do that, because I am a fractal essence of something else.
Yeah.
And so on. And it's mind-blowing, dude. Absolutely mind-blowing. And if you try to approach this with people who are not heavily invested in psychedelics, you might get a really blank stare a lot of the time. And it's unfortunate.
Or at least shadow work of some sort, you know, and this is why individuality is so critical. Like, you have to be able to do your own shadow work, you know, to understand yourself at a deep level and understand that the darkness is a guide. You know, how many people, you were saying, like, how many people have like come to a place of enlightenment just in the last couple, 2-3 years, for being locked down, for being told to socially distance, for, you know, being made to, you know, strap 2-3 face masks on their child so they couldn't breathe oxygen. They're breathing their own exhaust and getting sick because of that. And nobody wants to talk about it. And you're ostracized if you even bring it up. So,
right.
you know,
Yeah, or being separated
yourself,
from everybody, all of your loved ones, all of your friends, everything. And then, you know, I mean, yes, it's kind of dark that we have to communicate, that we had to communicate through Zoom, right? But you see what is happening on the back end of this is we're all grouping our like minds together. That I don't think this all would have happened without all that.
I think it's it's a separation of the logical and the illogical right now. You know, those who want to live in this fantasy land where, you know, men are women, women are men, men are unicorns. You can be whatever you want to be.
And a Fitbit makes you fit. Like,
yeah,
no, you know,
yeah,
Fitbit
no, and I
you
think
fit.
that's what we're at. I think that's the rip in the fabric, the separation that we're seeing right now is that people are, in essence, separating, and you're finding out who's like and who's not, who's coming with you in the next, you know, evolution, and who's staying here. And it's interesting.
You know, it makes me wonder though, like, man, and you know, the recurring thought for me has been on spontaneous human combustion. You know, I wonder if that was just a different method for a similar thing we're seeing now. And this might get some bad press or whatever, but you know, in the circles of like the whole 5D Earth thing, right? You have this idea that those people that are leaving this place now due to unforeseen circumstances, you know, evolving around a certain procedure, right? That was their out, and they took it. You know, and they're essentially they're done with this version, and they're going on to the next one, like we all do, which is the big secret is we all exist after we die. That's the big secret, right? That's the big thing. That's the only reason for fear in this world. If you knew, if they told you from birth, listen, you're gonna carry on after this thing you're in is gone. Uh, Dude, YOLO wouldn't exist. All of this whole paradigm around us wouldn't exist. The need for a metaverse that people could live forever in wouldn't exist. So it's just like this fear mechanism in order to allow this other world to be created.
Isn't
And
it the idea of scarcity? Like, you know, that life itself is scarce.
Yep.
right, and without all that, we wouldn't have created this next fractal inward that we are. This 2D universe, you know, quantum computational universe that is in many senses quite literally just the next deeper, you know, realm, right? It is within our realm. We facilitate, put on a helmet or download our consciousness into it, into another further one. So it's a dream within the dream. And we're forced to have a reason to create this secondary dream layer here. And in order for us to even want to create this thing, it'd have to get pretty bad out here, you know, and it has. We've had, you know, several hundred years of war, manufactured famine, and I think all of these things are very manufactured because they have to be. I don't think that if we were just in, you know, on God's green earth, if you want to call it that, right? Like it just existing, there wouldn't be scarcity. They had to come over here, kill all the buffalo, cut down all the trees, create scarcity in order for us to have the mindset to want to create this thing that we're all a part of now. This, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us, this metaverse, this next layer inward. Um, so it makes me wonder about the layer that we're in. What did it look like outside of here that they had to create? You know, what was it looking like for the gods that they were like, oh man, we better create this next layer inward? And you know, based on many spiritual practices, these gods have imparted a part of themselves into this that is helping us through this. And this is, you know, God's being used loosely as, you know, an insert for forces in the universe, right? If you're not big onto any one religion, maybe you can understand that there are bigger forces at play than just our own sense of logic and, you know, our own sense of reasoning. There's more to it. There's unreasonable things and there's illogical things, you
Well,
know,
and
that are also
that's
working.
part of natural law, right? Is logic. And we've gotten away from logic and we've replaced it with emotion. And that's a major issue with things nowadays, because you cannot have how can you solve problems if you can't have a logical discussion and it just gets emotional?
But when you look at logic, Matt, logic, you know, it seems at some point in the past, logic was tied to spirituality also. Like they were one and the same. You had a spiritually logical situation, and that seems to have been the last split that happened. And I think this would have been the time period where, you know, some of these technologies, like these cathedrals and like these power centers and all of this stuff, you know, when that separation of spirituality and logic happened, you know, you come from what we look at as like gosh, like ancient times basically is what we're taught to believe that it is. And maybe it was, you know, who's to say? Time is a weird thing. They've done a lot of messing with it. It's really hard to peg down when this analog, I call it the analog version of this reality happened, right? They had gotten, it seems, based on the way that technology has been introduced to us, all of this technology existed before, and at a minimum, it's larger, more analog component, right? and this thing was played out all across the world. Maybe, you know, I've been having this thought cross my mind, is perhaps this is what was happening during what we know as the Ice Age. Okay, and this is why it was steampunk. Everything had to be steam heated. We had an Ice Age. There was a necessity for certain things, and steam power was one of those things. And keep in mind, this could be a parallel timeline, or just a piece of the Akashic, or the ether, or an imaginary thing, right? But it's making its appearance through this Tartaria, free energy, steampunk, you know, on the back of a cult steampunk following that has happened for the last 30 years. So it's interesting how this is bubbling up to the surface. It went from, you know, probably just a few hundred people or some cosplay folks, you know, some different anime lovers and things like that, to now this thing is mainstream, and more people are showing belief and understanding in these concepts, these technologies. They're seeing the holes in what we see as like, all right, patent offices burning down, information on who did what is gone. Is that a coincidence, or is there a reason for that? You know, is there a reason that there's so many of these baby pictures with airships, dude? Like, or the Tonight by the Smashing Pumpkins, #1 music video of what, 1997, right? I was listening to that, reading the words, just dwelling over it the other night. And you want to know why it won? Because it's an homage to the previous version. All right, just like the Man in the or the A Trip to the Moon, 1902. Okay, we have these homages to the previous version. Now we have this what's her name, Guy, who does all these baby video, these cabbage baby videos in 1897, Matt, that
Oh
she
yeah,
did
yeah,
those.
Alice
Yeah,
Guy.
Alice Guy. Okay, so you know, so these are like the bidding of farewell and the welcoming of a new age, or a new version. Um, this is part.
Like look at this airship, Randy. It's lit up at night.
Do you really think that these people just imagined all this crap up, drew it all up like this? Just like, come on, like, and if they did, to me, as beautiful and dynamic as this world is, and as our minds are and our souls are, and how attached we are to each other, to the ether, you know, everything, right? The Akashic, if you want to call it that. I'm a firm believer in the informational field. I think that makes the most sense out of anything. And you know, that's what we are. That's what our body is. It's a field generator. That's all it is. It's a toroidal field generator, and what information we keep within this field dictates our perspective. It steers us. You know, it steers us, our energy, right? And you know, contrary to that, when you have information presented and you invest in it, it puts a hold on everything. It gums you up. It gums up your works. You're not flowing anymore. You're cycling. You're cycling on this concept, this idea. But then there are some ideas like the steampunk thing that flow through people. And whereas when you look at history as it's been presented to us, it doesn't have a flowy feeling. It has a very limited, linear. I mean, I think it's designed that way to make us question, if you ask me, like, what's going on here. None of the history that we've been handed ever made sense. It always had a structure to it that was just not random, you know, and and it made no sense. And so, you know, digging into this stuff, finding out technology, the backgrounds to technology. This is the biggest thing that I hope folks can take away, is when you look at a piece of technology and it's as dynamic and complex as our average vehicle, computer, even the copy machine at work. I mean, each of these individual parts had to be considered, thought up by somebody, put into place, and realized. Okay. And then for all of the technology we have now, and we're supposed to believe this stuff is falling off of spaceships or just like falling out of the sky, and we're seeing this and going, oh, yeah, let's do that.
Well, and then you look at a computer motherboard, and then you look at the layouts of our cities, and you know, you start seeing it again. It's replication, it's fractals.
It's almost like it's alive. Like these concepts are alive in this place, and you know, within us, and in the architecture, and in these concepts. Now, to me, that definitely screams more than like, okay, we were just slaves and hunter gatherers 10,000 years ago, and you're supposed to tell me that, all right, in 10,000 years, with only like what, two golden ages of a couple hundred years each, we considered and thought up all of these things, um, and then just like forced them on ourselves in the last few hundred years. I don't think it works that way. I think that there's an underlying evolution to each concept that we've been handed from the get-go, like been handed from about the 1800s or the 1900s, whether it's Manley P Hall or whether, and if you've read any of his stuff, you look at the different layers of mystery schools that are embedded in some of his teachings and those secret teachings. And you're going, this had to clearly take longer than 3,000 years, 4,000 years at most is the common understanding of where we stand, spiritually developed within our society. Right before that, it was just shamanism. Like, no, I don't know about that. Look at all the different detail embedded in all these different cultures. I think what we're looking at is the leftover fractal essence of something much larger, and it's crazy. And I think we're seeing like a duplication or recreation of this culture movement happening when we had people start coming out with having their own avatars in their phones and on Xbox, right? You had your own avatar. Like suddenly one day it popped up and it's like, create your own avatar, put some special hair on them, or some clothes, differentiate yourself from everybody, right? So they're starting to condition people's minds into moving into the next, we will call it simulation, because that's what it's going to be, where you can be anything. So you've got to get the collective conscious trained to believing that it can accept and be anything before you roll that stuff out.
Wasn't it interesting that the farther back you look, the more intact things are, the more sophisticated, whether it's like agricultural practices or religion, sacred text, or architecture.
Right. And so there's a big building up to that point that we're missing.
Right.
And it's not, and so
who done it?
We're handed ancient aliens, guys. We're handed ancient aliens. And then on the back of that today, and I'm not trying to side too hard with Ewar. I see what he's doing. I don't know about the way he's doing it. I think he's being a controlled op, if you ask me. The way that he's portraying the Shadow Rome theory and entity, I think he's doing it a disservice by flipping quite so hard. But I think that there's an element to what he's doing that is necessary. So that's cool. More power to him. He's playing the opposite side, and we do need that. We need the devil's advocate in all situations to help us better understand what's going on both sides. But I think that he's right about a certain amount of the Tartaria push, and certain subjects embedded within that movement are being pushed. When I see something that's just thrust by Instagram or thrust out there by YouTube, I gotta ask, what role is this playing in this information warfare that we're engaged in? But then when I see things that aren't pushed as hard, but really I get profound responses to, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm on to something here. Even if a couple people, I might get a comment, about a detail in somebody's small town, across the country that lines up with something I'm looking at here. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. It's not just here. It's and odds are when you see something in your own neighborhood or you see something that's out of place, there is, a duplicate fractal version of it in the next town over. It seems to be the way that this thing is built.
And that's what's crazy about this whole thing, Randy, and doing the podcast and having, I laugh because I have an international reach. It's hilarious to think, but at the same time, I have people in St. Petersburg that are Russia, that are walking downtown, taking pictures of old world buildings, showing me some of the architecture, showing me the bridges, statues. And it's such an amazing thing because, like you're saying, it's a fractal, because the same stuff that's over there was over here at certain periods of time before they destroyed it. And some of it's kept, some of it's here still, but some of it's not and long gone. And it's just so amazing to connect with people worldwide and find out. And you're starting to see now, with more people looking at this stuff, that more of it's coming out now too. And more of it's being uncovered.
I got something for you here, Matt. If I could share real quick here. See if I can. I'll just share my screen real quick. Hold on. Okay, so we're talking about fractal antennas and things, right?
Yep.
And this kind of just branches off of what you guys were talking about last time. And we see these antennas on the tops of these buildings with just bunches of electrodes and sticks and stuff all branching off of them, right?
This is from the book Shape
this
Power.
is from Shape Power by Dan A. Davidson, and I urge anybody to go take a look at this. He gets a little bit into the metaphysical, which is fine. I personally think
and anybody that wants to read this, I have this on my Patreon page for free. Anybody can go, it's on the public page, so go to patreon.com, Great Deception Podcast, and you can get this book Shape Power there.
And there's some interesting little gems in here. This one I wanted to bring to everybody's attention because it's demonstrating that electrostatic field can be carried by organic materials, in addition to things like styrofoam, and really the conductivity of the energy lies in the shapes that we're seeing. And so with this example, we have a 2-inch diameter styrofoam ball. And we have 9 wooden chopsticks stuck into this styrofoam ball. So anybody at home could do this, right? And it would amplify it if they spiraled some copper coils around these sticks and then have a ball of copper. So you could just imagine the amplification that would come with the metals being added. But electrostatic field, individual chopsticks have 40 volts per meter. So with 9 chopsticks into the ball, it generates 250 volts per meter. The magnetic field, 1 inch from the ball, there's 1 milligauss. So just this shape is creating, a flow of electricity, based on the laws of static electricity. So there's that, and I'm relatively certain if you were to set out onto the internet and try to find information on this, you might only find this. But it seems to me that since this Tartaria and Old World and fractal antenna situation has become more and more widely understood and thought of, we're seeing the emergence and the pushing of the information we're seeking. So guess what, guys? Seek and ye shall find, right? Ask and it shall be given unto you. So it's up to us to ask the questions. It's up to us to dig into the narratives that we find interesting or suspect or any of that stuff. Because in setting that ball into motion, things like this become readily available. And this has probably only been in the last few years that I've ever heard of this book or this concept being of any kind of wide reach. But I got a couple of other like old world things. Well, we've got the bricks turned into batteries, and folks can find that on my YouTube channel. So go check that out. I'll do a shameless plug there for a second. But let's see here. We got some other things, and I wanted to point this out. And we're going to start with the list of the world's fairs because this is like everybody's favorite, right? This is a catalyst moment for everybody. Now, I did one recently on like 1891, so I was like way off. I thought that I'd got the most recent or the oldest one, but guys, I was only looking at 1891, and I was tying the Hapsburgs into that. So that the General Land Centennial Exposition, which was 100 years in. But if we go back, 1791, guys, oh my gosh, look at this thing. 1791. So for this occasion, Mozart, guys, wrote his final opera. Can you believe that? What are the chances of that, right? He wrote his final opera. Was this even a person? This is what I gotta wonder at this point. The same with Napoleon and all of these, or was this even a family?
So that's
here's the two-headed eagle here.
That's fascinating that the first one was in Prague, because Prague is the only city, I may have this not exactly right, but one of the only old world cities in Europe that wasn't bombed and destroyed during World War II.
Yeah, look at this place. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Here's the Baroque Library Hall. I mean, so there's an entire era, guys, that we're missing that facilitated all of this. Look at this place. Unbelievable, and so they leave us these little gems. Now, here's the interesting thing. This is 11th century, the chapel dedicated to Saint Clement. a Dominican monastery was founded in the medieval period, supposedly, right, the 15th century, and was transformed in, get this, 1556 into a Jesuit college. So the 1500s, guys, are key to what happened to create this paradigm where everything is so divisive that we find ourselves in today.
Now,
Before that, it seems to have been a unity base, which facilitated all of this beauty.
now, Randy, by contrast, if you can look up real quick, the dancing building in Prague, just do a quick search for that. And you're going to see what the global
Dancing Lady building?
the globalist empire has in mind.
Is it
Because
the
this
Dancing
was
Lady?
the dancing, maybe it's called the Dancing Lady building.
Oh, wow.
That monstrosity. Now that was built on a site that was a very important. Yes, that's what that's
Oh,
what
wow,
the
yeah.
simulation has
I
to
love
offer
it.
us. That's
For
Yes.
those listening, it's like a curved building. It looks like a building that melted.
It's
Well,
a
you know, and I've
it's a
seen
decent
I've
path.
seen some versions of this in the Baroque style or in that Gilded Age style that had only windows that were twisted like that. And I thought I was looking at, you know, some kind of a misprint.
It's like a
But-
Dr. Seuss type thing.
Now this is the one site that was bombed by the United States during World War II, and that's what they built in its place. It's almost, I mean, not almost. It's
Look at
intended
that.
to mock the
Yeah, look what's right behind it.
Yeah.
the harmony.
Wow, dude.
It's
That's
just
exactly
so
right.
out of place and unnatural.
Look at these windows, look like they're just hanging off.
It's disjointed. It's just an awful monstrosity. But this is
Wowee.
supposed to be one of the most important buildings of the 20th century. That's what we're told.
Wow, it's got lotto numbers on it. Today's lotto numbers
For a
are.
good time call.
Yeah.
Oh, look at it. I
Yes.
bet you these are cell phone antennas too. Beautiful.
It's like a decrepit bird's nest.
So that's in the midst of Prague. And
Or a crown of thorns, right?
Yeah.
Ooh-wee. I'm telling you. Yeah, so Prague, guys, it's something else. And now this Czech library, of course, is invested into by UNESCO. And then we have the Memory of the World.
By the way, I'm going to Prague in April.
Nice.
Man.
Bring your camera.
I will. I'll bring
That's epic. So there's this thing, guys, called the Memory of the World, and it's UNESCO, right? Where have we heard UNESCO before? These are the the keepers of history, right?
The World
And,
Heritage.
World Heritage, the Memory of the World. Now, there's a program they have in place called the Memory of the World Program, and here's the story with it. Facilitates preservation of the world's documentary heritage, particularly in areas affected by conflict and or natural disaster. So these are the recreators of the history that we are all sold in our school system. And of course, they're going to, because they're the good guys, remember this, enable universal access to documentary heritage worldwide. Okay. This is why when you see a narrative coming out and you see something pushed or you see something widely available, you need to understand who the people are behind it that are making this stuff available for you. Yeah. Between these folks and the Smithsonian, there's a massive pile of information out there that's just plain wrong and one-sided. So, you know, that being said, I'm not vouching for any side of the story because they're all just sides. So, but, you know, and they're doing the same thing that the Smithsonian is. I was reading the Smithsonian contributions to knowledge, and their preface explains how they're doing exactly this thing. It should be permanently accessible to all without hindrance, right? So, yeah, and these are the same people that sit on the history of the folks that were living in Louisiana and Monroe County, the most ancient, oldest, you know, people in the world, Aboriginal people, and it's like a darker complected folks from Louisiana. So, you know, there's a lot of information they're sitting on that is just and right. But you got to keep in mind, like when this whole shift happened in the 1500s to the 1800s, a lot of people were displaced by these others who came in. Like, so there was a bunch of people, you know, who originally facilitated this monastery and resided there and worked there. And then they were taken over in 1556 by a Jesuit college. So there's definitely a shift that happened there. And I think when we see all of these wars happening after that, Um, you know, I got to say, all of those wars that happen after that are a direct response to these people taking over a bunch of stuff. And so it's a shift into this corporate slavery that we're in today. Uh, and the Jesuit College helped facilitate that. And it's interesting, man. So that's that one. Let's see here. Then we've got the Colossus back here pinning down the dragon. And there was another one I wanted to pull up. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, Matt. This just kind of randomly came up in 1890, the 100 Years Flood, it's called. I haven't had a chance to dig into this at all. But like, you know, the only story they have on it is this bridge that they had to rebuild. But like, why would you call it the 100 Years Flood?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Unless something was happening, and this is in the Prague Underground tour. So maybe take a look into this, Matt, when you head out there, or Matthew. You know, they've got an underground tour place. Maybe we can.
I will definitely be looking into that.
Maybe we could dig into what they've got on their little online museum here real quick. But you know, I never heard of this before today. I was looking at 1891, you know, for that video I was doing last week, and I had this pop up, and I'm like, I've never seen this or heard of this. And I've been looking at these dates over and over again for the last, you know, year and a half, and I had still never heard it. But we have, yeah, they say supposedly this flood devastated this Charles Bridge on 9/3/1890. Cannons alerted the citizens that the water was rising quickly. That's an interesting thing to say. That they only shot the cannons to warn the people. I don't know about that. That's just like them, you know, blowing up everything to stop the fire. You know, so we have the same thing happening over there. And why you would call it the 100 Years Flood?
Well, and then you get into it down below, Randy. Even it says the repair of the Charles Bridge after the flood in 1890 took a lot of manpower and a lot of time. Okay, obviously, but then it says dynamite had to be used as well as steam-powered machines. Like,
so it's, you know, and if these were the same people that had built all this in the first place, they would know how to rebuild it.
Yeah,
you know, if a flood wiped out a lot of it, they would just reestablish it and rebuild it. But there was a changing of the times that was happening. You know, there was a push to brutalism, like we see now. You know, and what that egregore or that force is that is pushing everybody to brutalism, and that twisted building we were looking at a moment ago, and all that stuff, you know, is interesting. And you know, when they paint the medieval time as this really dark, twisted place with nothing happening but torture, you know, and execution and all this, I think that this is a lie, guys. I think that this medieval time is the steampunk time we're looking for. But it's
and this is the time when Europe is being invaded, right, by the Muslims, and that's I think that's why
which came out of the east after China had reformed.
Yes,
because you know, and what's interesting, man, this goes right into the Lord of the Rings, right? What do we have? We have evil starting in the east, finding its way west, eventually making its way all the way to the Shire, which I think is representative of North America. So, you know, I think that there's something in all of these aspects, all of these things are telling, whether it's H.G. Wells or, you know, J.R.R. Tolkien. I think that there's something that can be gained from all of these things that have been pushed in our faces, and they've capitalized on us for, right? Like, that's the whole thing, is like we're being fed pieces of our true past and being made to pay for them, and being made to buy a ticket, you know, or buy the book. You know what I mean? Meanwhile, all the stuff that's paid for and free is all bullshit. You know, all the stuff we're fed in school. I mean, if you knew what kids are learning in school nowadays, the way that they look at themselves in relation to others, and gender and this and that and mental status and everything else, like that establishment is clearly not doing anybody any favors. And but that's the free stuff, guys. You know, that's just the free stuff. We got to buy our own past.
We had a bit of a confrontation in our house around this agenda being pushed to our, you know, I've got 3 boys. The youngest one is 12, and he came home, and they've all got this, you know, the school sanctioned laptop. And he shows us they're in their social studies class, they're doing gender dysphoria instruction. He's 12.
Social studies used to be history when I was a kid.
Right. So the instructor, well, the instruction was that, you know, boys can be girls and girls can be boys. You can choose any identity that you want, and nobody can tell you different. When I read that in front of him and my my wife, I just like I went blank. I picked up the laptop and I snapped it in half. And he, of
Yeah.
course, was
See,
frozen. Like, what did
oh
you do,
man.
Dad? I had to buy him a new laptop, but it was worth it for the lesson. I
I
was like,
love
this
it.
is all it takes. You just got
That's
to
it.
break the cord.
But that's
And
it.
that doesn't exist anymore.
That's how easy it is, isn't it, Matthew? I mean, you think about it, all you have to do is just, you don't have to engage.
Mm-hmm.
We can
Yeah.
disengage from this, but we've been indoctrinated and programmed to believe that the only way to exist is through the system. You have
And
stay
to react when we think we feel differently or think we know differently. All we've been
Yep.
taught is to react and conflict with that system. You know, we're told pay attention. We're never told ignore. We're never taught ignore. There's a lot of situations in life where you should be ignoring everything that's coming your way, but we're not taught that. We were taught to pay attention and to sit up straight and stop talking, you know, and you know, all of those things that we're taught, which impulsively as a child we fight and rebel against. That's the natural state of things. I think that was previously in this I don't know, I wouldn't call it gilded age, but in this, you know, medieval time, right, where this dark period, I don't think it was dark at all, guys. I think that this is the missing portion that we are all looking for in this Tartaria movement. It's being spun as you know, only having ruins that were being explored. When we hear tales of exploration in these periods, we're taught of people arriving to ruins or buried cities. Um, I think that there were functioning cities. I
Well,
think that there were, you know, there was infrastructure that facilitated all of this beautiful machinery, all of the things we come to take for granted today. Like you go in your bathroom at work and look at this automatic paper towel dispenser and think about that. Look at this thing and see how many, pop it open and look at all the parts in there that, you know, are operating. It would take a clocksmith, right, in times past to construct that thing. So logically, um, you know, you realize a lot of these concepts came from before the time of computation. Okay, the ideas for gears and mechanisms and things came from human ingenuity at some time in the past, and then we've relegated them since into you know, programs in a computer that just generates them for us. But at some point, there was a building of all of that information, and that's what's hidden in the dark ages. That's, you know, what's being kept from us under the guise of all of these horrible things. Now, do I think that the, you know, witch burning and stuff didn't happen? No, I do think that the elimination of those old peoples did happen. It definitely seems to have happened. Whether we're looking at all of the bones under the cathedrals in Europe, or whether we're looking at, you know, all of the burial mounds that have been excavated and stolen by the Smithsonian, uh, there's evidence to suggest that, you know, yes, there was something, and we are just denied information about it. And it really makes me question what we're coming up with like these archive releases of a lot of this information on Tartaria, and the direct correlation between Tartaria and what we've come to understand are like Mongolians, and the way that the Khanate and the ranking of kings is attributed to two separate control structures. We have the European kings, and then we have the Tartarian kings or the Khans, right? But embedded within all of this stuff is we've also got the the Habsburg family, which last name is Khan. So, you know, I got to ask myself, wait a minute, what's going on here? And they all seem to be pushing for the same agenda, the same reformation of people that has happened over the whole world. And, you know, it's just crazy. But this Habsburg family goes back to 1096, something like that. And, you know, in addition to that, they had their hands in what was called the Sultanate of Rum, RUM, which, you know, in my book, that's just about as close to Rome as you're going to get. And it's the two-headed eagle, and it's a sultanate, which would have been like a Turkish, you know, Turkish-based kind of group of people, you know, if we're talking ethnicity. So these were just rulers, you know, the same ruling class that was spread everywhere. So this thing existed everywhere, this federation, this empire. So we seem to have pivoted between empire and trade federation. And then it seems like we're on our way back to empire. Okay, because like we were a trade federation for several hundred years at least. We saw the end of that with the fall of Tartaria and that Prince Amidala looking lady, the Boxer Rebellion in China. So that was like a usurpment of the Trade Federation. What came in after that was this Hapsburg family, Germanic origin. You know, there was some kind of an uprising within the empire, and maybe several uprisings. One of which being like kind of the Jesuit-led order of indoctrination and things. So maybe they were all part of the same thing, but playing a different part. You know, you have the Jesuit order pushing the religious, kind of anti-spiritual, anti-pagan, anti-earth, anti-connection stuff over here. And then you had, you know, the thing changing from a kingdom or like a serfdom over to an indentured servitude, which seemed to have been in play when it was a trade federation. That was what you did when you were young. You were indentured to somebody to learn their trade. You learned their trade. You learned how to handle things, how to construct technology, do whatever you're going to do, erect buildings, what have you. You learned that. You were an apprentice for 10 to 20 years or 10 years, became a journeyman, and then you paid off, you know, your master because you learned from that master. That's how a master servant relationship used to work at some point in the past. Was you were gaining something.
That's one thing that came to me today, Randy, when I started looking at it is the word servant and how it's gotten such a negative connotation. But in reality, that's what we should be called because we're serving the greater good. If you think
Right.
about it, you know,
Right,
and
that's what brings growth. It really does.
Yeah, they've
you know?
anointed it with like slave almost.
They've associated it with either slavery, or it's a bad thing to be self-serving. There's all kinds of twisting going on with that. It's that server or that slave, the slave terminology. We lean it to racism. You know, we tie it to racism and being directly crossed over with skin color and all of this. But I think it's more dynamic than that. I think it was a social paradigm that, and at some point in the past, maybe it changed, right? And people took advantage, which I'm sure has happened. But at some point in the past, it seems that a servant master relationship was a mutual relationship. It was contractual to some degree. And far enough back in the past, it wasn't a written contract. It was, you know, a moral obligation. Like that's, you know, you gave your word and you did that. And you may have given your word for any number of reasons. You might have been broke and had nothing and needed a place to stay. And this guy had a castle. So guess what? You sign up in his, you know, in his fiefdom or kingdom or, you know, khanate, right? You sign up for this guy. He's got more resources. You want some resources and you don't want to have to work quite so hard for him. So, you know, you say, hey, yeah, listen, I'll till your field. You're going to give me some of what I pull out of the field? Awesome. And then it got to a point where I don't know if population, you know, overcame the, you know, or just scarcity was invented, maybe is what happened. Scarcity became invented, or we had situations like maybe some floods and things that took away a lot of those resources and you know, caused an uprising or a turbulent effect within society because these people who were, you know, enslaved to these masters were no longer getting whatever they were contracted to get back from the master. And because the master didn't have anything, the fields were flooded. How am I going to give you anything? The fields are flooded. Guess what? You guys all get together, grab your swords and stuff. We'll go take some shit from the next guy. And, you know, then at some point it just kept happening. People started realizing and getting a thirst and a hunger for power. How long in the past is anybody's guess, right? But, you know, this way that,
and that's a key thing though, is not being able to even put a finger on ballpark of when.
right. And I think that it's just happened over and over again.
Exactly.
And I think that if you were to go 1,000 years ago, you might see the same thing happening 10,000 years before that. And I think that it just, perpetual, and is happening now. We have a branch of people leaning into their own freedom and their own sovereignty. We see that coming back around. It's making an appearance. There's a lot of people moving towards that. There's a lot of interesting things happening in science, what I actually call science or consider science, like physics, the physics side of things, the legitimate understanding of the dynamics of the universe, not theory, not theory, not Einstein and theory and that stuff, but genuine working into these problems. The cymatic or frequential side of things right now is blossoming. It's unfortunately for most of us is going to be, incredibly expensive to access for most people for an extended period of time. But look at how expensive televisions were, flat screen TVs were 10 years ago. So there's, if we want it to happen in 10 years, if we as a collective or enough of us decide that we want to take a different approach to healing or a different approach to energy, we have an opportunity to, help to create all of this collectively. But we have to first, detach ourselves from this illusion that we can't, or that we shouldn't, or that, in the Tartaria situation, or that high technology and frequential energy led to their downfall and caused these mud floods, right? So there's a reason that dynamic is being pushed. Did these people short out their own system and wipe themselves off the face of the earth? All of that scare tactic.
Yeah, it
Guess
goes
what?
back to the whole Icarus idea, right? Getting too close to the sun, you're gonna melt.
You better not do that. But the sun is pure love and energy, so you don't want to get close to that, right? That whole thing. But so it's like a double-edged sword. What we're seeing presented and handed to us now through this old world movement is okay, here's all their stuff, but guess what? What if they caused a giant arc bolt to come down from the sun and just scour the face of the earth because they were using free energy, man? I've heard that one thrown around. Or that the controllers got the free energy and just wiped out a big swath of people. Personally, I think that people are more than happy to do that to each other. So I don't think you would need a giant sky laser to create the decimation that we see having happened recently, at least, these fires, these worlds. I think people setting fire could easily create the firestorms that we're looking at in the 1890s, could easily be the reason that all this stuff happened. And it wouldn't take much. Some kerosene, some dirigibles, a couple of dudes with a bad attitude,
a mirror.
That's it.
Lens.
And it doesn't matter. And I don't even think you would need to go that technical on it, Matt. I think you give people some Molotov cocktails and put them in a drivable balloon, and nobody knows they're coming, and it's the middle of the night.
And we know they had Greek fire in the Civil War. So, what's to say you weren't dropping Greek fire out of these dirigibles?
Or even high explosives. These were real things. These companies that we like to believe have only just come around in the 1940s, like Farben, like IG Farben and things. Listen, just because they were established as a legitimate titled company back in the 19 somethings doesn't mean they weren't a collective group before that. It absolutely does not. 50 years before that, their great grandparents would have been hanging out with each other and would have been up to probably the same no good. They would have been
just incorporated. That's the only difference.
And so Nobel of the Nobel Prize fame, didn't he invent dynamite and all that?
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm wondering what the process leading up to him claiming that was, though. But
he was involved with explosives.
Well, and that's the crazy thing,
explosives.
Yeah, and this era of the gold rush and just this massive shift and change in society that we see is just incredible, especially if you look into it and you realize the technology that was available, even if it was only available to a select few. So maybe dirigibles weren't flying all around in the sky like we have airplanes today.
Maybe they were.
Maybe they were, right? Yeah, I'd imagine they probably were. You had people that needed to move people to other places. They needed money, so on. And the only time that dirigible business stopped was when they put out that fear porn of the Hindenburg. Then suddenly you could not get a noble or a lightweight noble gas straight from water with electricity. that's where they cut it off.
Because we went to oil.
They cut it off. They said,
oil-based.
or you're going to get it from helium, which is mined,
Hmm.
right? Or created out of hydrogen via synthetic process. So, you know, that's when they grab the market by the balls, you know, and they're like, okay, we're no longer going to allow people to, first of all, use free energy. Guess what? That free energy combined with water creates hydrogen, creates dirigibles, creates freedom for these people. You know, for many people, if they had the initiative to put it all together, that's the thing. You know, that I think that people have this idea, well, at least I know I did, of this like utopian Tartarian society, you know, where everybody has a dirigible and they're all just running around on pedaling like a bicycle on a balloon and just motoring on around the sky, all around the city. Listen, you would have to build it yourself, most likely, back in these times. You know, we didn't have manufacturing plants pumping out Ford Model Ts until the 1900s. So you didn't have mass production the same way you do today. Does it mean it was not produced at all? No, it means it was a very personal thing. It was a very love-filled endeavor to create your own dirigible or your own clockwork, right? Or your own any of these other things that you've studied most of your life, being a servant to a master, right, who taught you how to do all of this stuff. And then you took it on your own and you freed yourself. You went and built your dirigible and floated all around until some power shift happened. Someone decided enough's enough. We can control these people. So here's the thing that had to happen. They had to have a method of control. I think there was already in place through the cathedral, like we were looking at earlier. They already had some idea of the harmonics that were necessary, the shape power that was necessary to get into the minds of people, the, you know, cymatic frequencies or you know, vibratory essence of the sounds that they were creating in these churches. And they were finding out over trial and error as they were presenting their sermons to these people. They were finding out that, holy crap, I can almost say anything to these people when that organ's playing, or after that organ plays, or after those bells chime, and they'll eat it right up. And over time, people started to find this out. And then the wrong people started to find this out. And then it just snowballed. It developed a life of its own. And, you know, that's the fruition of what we understand as, you know, social engineering today. Like that's, you know, it had to start somewhere. And it probably had a very humble beginning. Like somebody just noticing when those bell chime, people were more easily convinced to buy something at the grocery store in town after that bell chimed, right? Like he always got a rush. The meat market always had a rush right after the noon bell, you know, or so there would be social cues that people would notice and people would decide to take advantage of them, or the vizier, you know, of the royal house or of the master's domain, whoever was in town being the eyes and ears for that master, would pick up on these things if they were paying attention. And they most likely would pay attention because they would be well fed, well watered, and well informed. So, you know, meanwhile, most of the people out there are just not. So that's my thought on it. And I don't know that there was ever like, you know, an incredible utopia where like all of the bells were being used for good. I like to hope so. I like to believe that there was a lot of healing going on, but I think that after a while, you know, people realize that they can profit from something, so they don't give it away. We kind of see that today, but you have to keep yourself afloat. You know, you have to have that respect in yourself to, you know, create something for yourself and to invest in yourself and to, I guess, allow others to invest in you also. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the money for the clockwork or the dirigibles or the things that you wanted to do or the ideas you wanted to explore and things like that.
Yeah, and there's always been the haves and the have-nots, I think, even in a utopian society, so to speak, as we picture it. I think
we'd still have farmers. We would still have
Yes.
farmers outside of the city walls. Even in these star cities, you're still going to have, you know, a vast majority of your buildings outside of the city walls, which there were some, definitely. And those may have been the ones that needed to be brought down via war or what have you, so that the city could expand. So what do? You stage a war, you pay an enemy to come in, knock at your gate, create a ruckus. All the farmers suddenly have to flee into the city. Then you have the opposite party just demolish all of their residencies. Then you expand your city outward. And guess what? Those people that lived in those homes are grateful that you're giving them a 6x10 apartment in the city instead of their big farm that they just used to live on as they were serving you. And they become a different type of servant. Then over time, this turns into a big thing where you just have a city cram full of people. Everybody's subservient to this dude at the top of the hill. And, perhaps all of these dudes at the top of the hill were some form of caliphate or Roman, dictator, or what do you call it? Governor. And I say Roman, when I say Roman people, I don't mean, Rome as we've come to understand it. I mean the socialist republic underlying everything. It's underlying all of our government today. It was most likely underlying everything and part of the overall government in the past. We at least have some idea of that based on the two falls of Rome that we've come to understand, based on our current narrative and paradigm timeline. There's been at least two falls of Rome, so that suggests that the power structure reached such a point that it had to be knocked back down again. And I think we're getting close to that point again, where it's right there at the top. and so then we have the distractions thrown our way.
Yep.
And we got direct portals to distractions in the palm
Repeated
of our hands.
over and over and over. Man.
We don't got to go to church. We don't got to go to the cathedral.
Yeah.
Have the bells. We got our bells rung every day, dude.
Yep.
Like,
well, you get your frequency through the mirror, right? The black mirror gives us all the frequency that you need to keep you in that lower vibrational frequency that they want to keep us in, that disjointed, that diseased state, So guys, this has been awesome. Unfortunately, I gotta bounce to another show at the bottom of the hour here. I want you guys to get plugs in and all that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, dude, I appreciate you letting me be long-winded, man. I've had a lot of time to dig into a lot of this stuff, so I appreciate being able to speak on it with you guys. And we'll have to get into some more of the shape power stuff sometime, Mathew, so that so we can dig into this, because I'm finding it incredible and knowing what you do for a living. I'm just enthralled with the way that you are manipulating this very living thing that is geometry. I think that's incredible. So we'll have to dig into that some more, but I'm glad we were able to hit a few of these things. But yeah, dude, the bells, the cathedrals, the shape, sympathetic vibratory physics, and control. These things are all directly intertwined with each other.
Well, it's fascinating to look at cathedrals as like louche collectors of some sort. You're making me rethink a lot of things. The simulacrum, or the versus the holographic universe. So I learned a lot.
I got a little carried away today, guys, but man, I've been holding on to some of that stuff, so I'm glad to be able to share it.
Yeah, no, it's all fascinating. We're all learning as we go. We're sharing notes, and I think this is just an amazing process. I'm just really happy to be part of it. Yeah, Matt, again, thank you for facilitating this.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
this is brother. Great. These are the kind of discussions I can't have with normal people in my life. So that's why I love this, like I say, this podcast has been a blessing, because all this great information, Randy, I know you go long-winded, but it's such fun information. I sit here and I listen and I'm like, I don't want to chime in because I'm into it, and it's such fascinating information, and it involves everything in our lives. It touches every aspect. It touches everything that we do without us paying attention to it, without us even knowing it. And it's a mind screw when you get down to it.
Yeah. And doing your work, doing your shadow work, and like I was saying before, like when you do, the people that are doing their own shadow work, right, are much more able to receive and be open to this kind of information, I think, because it does get a little dark, and
that's what I found.
See that as a guide to the light.
It's exactly what I found. I wasn't spiritual or full of faith when I came into this, but going through the darkness that I've, read and uncovered, and I'm more faithful now than I've ever been in my life. You
Right.
know, I feel a greater connection to the creator, the one, than I ever have before. And it's through
That's
this,
awesome. I
you
love
know, it's
that.
through
That's
this
what it's about.
information, you know, it's such a beautiful thing that it elevates you almost, in a sense. It gets your mind out of the low vibrational frequency, and it gets you up in those higher vibration, and you start attracting like-minded people, and then the thoughts evolve. And that's what I've noticed, right? I mean, like I tell people, and I got this from Owen Benjamin, I may be wrong, but I'm not lying. You know,
Yeah.
I'm going to present you what I believe or what I've read at the time, and it may be right or wrong, but that's not on me at the time to decipher. Like, I'm not
No,
giving it
man.
to you in a false sense,
Yeah,
trying
you
to
just
benefit
got to
from
be
it.
open. You got to be open to the next rebuttal and the next piece of new information, and
Yeah.
it's always
Well,
going to take you where you least expect.
and that's why I like the whole Ewar spin, because it made me reevaluate my, you know, my work that I'd done, and go back and double check some of the stuff. Like, you know, was this just kind of riding the wave of what everybody else was putting out there, or was it factually based?
Yeah.
And that
He's
makes
just causing us to do our homework and sharpen our pencils.
and that's what it is. And those people that got so super emotional, like freaked out when he did it, they're
Oh,
gone.
he lost like 40,000 subscribers or something like
Yeah.
that. Like some ridiculous amount dropped off real quick.
Yeah.
And you know, I was just glad that he came up with the Shadow Rome thing. That's something that's been kind of eating at me, looking at all of this, looking at you know, Montezuma wearing Roman sandals and you know, portrayed as a wearing a toga and like all this stuff. And it's like, wait, this is the same thing. And then you start looking at egregores, Mathew, and thought constructs, and you're going, wait a minute, whoa, you know? And so it blows the ancient alien thing, the tangible nut and bolts ancient alien thing out of the water, because these things don't have to physically exist.
Yep.
These gods, these, you know, aliens, these
Mhm.
entities, they don't have to exist because we create them. That's the whole point of us being here. And it's incredible. Like, we're
Yep.
creating all of this, all this beauty, and we just got to want to look at it. You know,
Yeah.
we got to want to look at the beauty
Yeah.
through the pain.
That's the truth, man. And hey, that's a great spot to wrap up. Randy, let everybody know where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, much love, everybody. Random Randy, and you can find me on YouTube at Random Fracts. It's the same as the Instagram. Finally got my YouTube channel where it's titled, so that's nice. That took some doing. So yeah, youtube.com/at Random Fracts. On Instagram at Random Fracts. And yeah, man, dude, I really appreciate it. I've been doing the solo thing for a minute. We'll continue to do that. That's kind of my weekly therapy, to dig into something, to just kind of follow where the flow takes me. A lot of the flow comes from looking at like a Wikipedia page and jumping into some stuff, like some of the stuff I demonstrated here tonight. But then other stuff just kind of comes from pondering, you know. So I urgently urge everybody out there to think about things, you know, and what they mean to you, and how you can adapt or overcome. And if you can't, if it doesn't serve you, then just get rid of it. You know, don't hold on to that stuff. It's you know, as much as people are like, well, I'm not going to forgive anybody for the way they were acting last year. Listen, just forgive, guys. It'll be okay. You know, we'll get through all this. We got to move on. We got to forgive for everything, ourselves, everyone included. But I appreciate you having me, Matt, and Mathew. I appreciate talking to you, dude. We're gonna have to dig into some more of the what people call woo-woo stuff, Mathew, because I'm with you on a lot of fronts of this, and I think that there's some conversations that you and I've got to get involved in, buddy.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of spin-off conversations that need to be had, and I'm all about it. So I'm looking forward to having them with both of you. So you can find me at matthewrsmith.art, and that's a page on the new Agora website that's hosted by Lorenzo and autodidactic fellow. And then my architecture work is at dreamdesignbuild.org. Matt, thank you again, brother.
Oh, guys, I appreciate it. I love talking with you. We will definitely do this one again. We got a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
and
much love,
I'd love to see you two get together, because I can't wait to listen to hear what you guys come up with, because man, every time I talk with you, Mathew, and same with you, Randy, you know, like I said, I got a laundry list of notes here and things to go over. It's beautiful. So
Right
thank
on,
you
dude.
guys so much. I
Yeah, much
appreciate it.
love.
And,
Yeah, fight the man, guys. Fight the man,
yes.
everybody. Don't let the man get you down. But you ain't got to fight him. My bad.
Yeah.
Just don't
All right,
get
much love.
Stay strong and question everything.